We want to turn now to some of the backlash President-elect Trump is facing after calling for members of the House January 6th Select Committee to be jailed. Here's a reminder of what he said on NBC's Meet the Press on Sunday.
Cheney was behind it, and so was Benny Thompson and everybody on that committee. For what they did, honestly, they should go to jail.
So you think Liz Cheney should go to jail?
For what they did.
Everyone on the committee, you think?
I think everybody anybody that voted in favor.
Are you going to direct your FBI director and your attorney general to send them to jail?
No, not at all. I think that they'll have to look at that, but I'm not going to. I'm going to focus on drill, baby, drill.
He already directed them to. Yes. He just said they should all go to jail. No, I'm not going to direct them. They should all go to jail. He already directed them to.
Fox News legal analyst Jonathan Turley criticized those comments, writing on his website, quote, "There is no viable criminal case to be made against the J6 committee members for their investigation or report. We need to move beyond the rage rhetoric if this country is going to come together to face the tough challenges ahead. I consider the J6 committee to be not just a colossal failure, but a missed opportunity for a bipartisan look at that tragic day. Having said that, these are ethical and political failings, not criminal violations." Joining the conversation, we have President of the National Action Network and host of MSNBC's Politics Nation, Reverend Al Sharpton, and White House correspondent for Reuters, Jeff Mason, joins us. Good to see you, Jeff.
Jeff, we have Donald Trump talking about sending members of Congress to jail. And we have Kash Patel, his pick to be FBI director, saying that reporters should be sent to jail. So I'm curious, how are you covering the story? And you hear Jonathan Turley, even a longtime supporter of Donald Trump, saying he crossed the line here. Where does this go?
Well, the first thing I would say is I think anyone who speculates, just like they did 8 years ago, that what Donald Trump says is not what he means is not realizing who the president-elect is. And the fact that he's talking about it openly and suggesting this is what I want, but then transitions quickly to drill, baby, drill. Kash Patel is listening to what he's saying. The Justice Department is listening to what he's saying. The people who work for him are listening to what he's saying. I don't think you can write it off.
Rev?
I think that it is dangerous because if you listen closely, he says that everyone that voted should go to jail. So, I mean, if that's not moving all the way to a tyranny in this country, if you vote against me, that's criminal, is actually what he's saying here. I think that's very dangerous. And I think he's right. When you have the incoming, at least nominee, to be the incoming FBI director and others listening to the will of the incoming head of state, where he can criminalize people that vote in a way that he doesn't agree in a congressional committee, that's a danger to all of the American public.
I mean, Jonathan, though, how does that look? He arrests a member of the press. Kash Patel does. He arrests Liz Cheney for doing something that's perfectly legal. So we're all thinking about that, and it's horrifying. It's un-American. Some would even say that's the rhetoric of a fascist. But what happens next with a country that has 240 years of checks and balances? We saw what happened in South Korea when they declared martial law, and they had a history lasting about 20, 25 years of a democracy. We have 240 years. So what happens the day after? How chaotic does it get for Donald Trump and people inside the White House?
Well, there are a few things here. There's been a lot of conversation about the lack of protest movement around Donald Trump this time around. I think that would change if he were to follow through on some of these promises. Arresting members of Congress, arresting members of the media, the mass deportation plan that doesn't just focus on criminals, but rather just everyday people who have been in the community for decades. You know, he has never outlined what charges there would be here for these arrests for members of Congress or members of the media. We'd have to look on that. But I think some of this is beyond a threat to retroactively arrest. It's a threat to intimidate for the future. That's the idea here, is to try to intimidate members of Congress to not investigate him on this second term, to intimidate members of the press to not dig deep, because we will, even if we don't arrest you, perhaps try to seize your notes or get your phones, or to try to stop your reporting and intimidate you that way, saddle you with expensive legal bills that most reporters cannot pay. So it's as much as it is looking backwards as it is looking forwards and setting a scary tone for the next 4 years.
Yeah, and we'll see how far Kash Patel goes. He's got some kind words from Republicans on the Hill yesterday, but we'll see how long that continues. A couple things to say about Donald Trump's comment, Jeff. On the drill, baby, drill. As we've said many times, the United States is pulling more oil out of the ground than any country in the history of human civilization right now. That's one part. The second part from Jonathan Turley about it not being a bipartisan January 6th committee. Democrats sure tried.
Thank you for bringing that up.
They got Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, and that's it. On the Senate side, Mitch McConnell decided not to participate in an investigation of his own. So that all needs to be said.
And Kevin McCarthy.
Kevin McCarthy.
The Democrats kept working.
They tried.
Name your people. Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's figure this out. There were a couple of bomb throwers, rhetorical bomb throwers. They, no, let's pick some others. And they tried to work, as these committees do. And Republicans walked away from it.
And Republicans were threatened on January 6th, too. It's not as if that attack was just aimed at Nancy Pelosi and Democrats. It was aimed at all the lawmakers who were there.
So, Jeff, let's pick up on this conversation about the transition that you're covering. Pete Hegseth is the man of the moment on Capitol Hill right now, but also up there yesterday were Tulsi Gabbard, Donald Trump's choice for DNI, Kash Patel at FBI. What is your sense of how Republicans in the Senate are managing this idea that a lot of them privately, as you know, don't think any of those three are qualified for the jobs that they've been put up for, but also need to massage Donald Trump in the way that they have over the years?
I think that last point is key. They're doing a vetting process. They want to show the president-elect that they're talking to his candidates and considering it before the vote. You had Senator Joni Ernst come out yesterday and say that she had met again with the former Fox News host, and said somewhat positive things, but also didn't come out and say, I'm going to support him. As for the rest, I think it's a time game. See to what extent they get the support from these Republicans, and to what extent the lawmakers are willing, if they get that far, to stand up to the president-elect and say, nah, this is not what we want. It's what they did with Gates. To some extent, Gates ended up resigning or pulling out. See if that happens to anybody else.
Ralph, interesting editorial board column by the Washington Post going off of this Kristen Welker Meet the Press interview, where it says Trump tries a softer tone and a harder one, too. For Trump 2.0, prepare for the worst, but do not assume it at every turn. Fascinating because, of course, for us, and I think for everybody else, the headline was arrest Liz Cheney, arrest Benny Thompson, arrest everybody. But no, I'm not gonna call for that. But what the Post is saying, sift through that, but also look where he talks about wanting compromise on immigration, wanting compromise possibly on abortion. That's hard for Democrats to do when he's talking about arresting a member of the caucus. But is the Washington Post onto something here? Should they try to seek compromise on, for instance, Dreamers or the immigration issue? That's what the Washington Post is saying.
I think that the challenge Democrats have is not to play to the cheap seats that Trump sometimes plays to. And you need to keep in mind, what is your end goal? What is your end result? And if compromising sometime to get some things through for the good of the people, then you do that. That's not selling out. That's why we sent you to Washington.
That's right.
And I think that and those of us that are out there in the communities and speak up need to give them the room to do that, because at the end of the day, we want to see what is better.
Give the Democrats room. Let me ask you this question, because the Post is saying Democrats should sit down and start talking now. Should Hakeem Jeffries sit down with Donald Trump and try to figure out, let's say, possible compromises on immigration?
I think Hakeem Jeffries should. sit down and seek to do it. And let President-elect Trump be the bad guy in the room if that's what happens. But don't let it be said you didn't try to do all you could for your constituents, and we shouldn't be outside screaming at you for going into a meeting. That's why we sent you to Washington.
That's right, Jeff.
I would just add, Jonathan and I both covered President Trump's first term. He dangles compromises and then he goes away. I mean, there were talks then about doing something with the Dreamers, and he actually seemed like he wanted to do something about the Dreamers, and then he walked away from it. Same with gun control. There was a moment after, I think it was Parkland, where it looked seriously like President Trump might want to do something on gun violence protection, and then the NRA got involved, and then he pulled away. So he does talk about compromise, and then it doesn't come to fruition with the Democrats.
Yeah, you know what's so fascinating, Jonathan? I know you've covered him, and I know you and Jeff agree on this. He talks about compromise, and he pulls back. For somebody that controls his base as much as he does, he's awfully fearful of it at times. Like, for instance, he will not talk about Operation Warp Speed, which, again, we've talked about around this table, perhaps one of the great achievements scientifically over the past 50 years. Won't talk about that because he did one time with Bill O'Reilly, and he got booed. So I'm wondering, is there any reason to believe that he's going to move, that he's not going to be as constrained by his base this time, or is it going to be more of the same?
To this point, it looks like more of the same. You're right about Operation Warp Speed. I was talking to someone else about this a few days ago who said that should be the first room of his presidential library, that accomplishment, because it's something that usually takes 5, 6, 7 years to develop vaccine. They did it in 10 months, and they were able to distribute it during a global pandemic. But this is someone who, when given the choice between being a unifier or a divider, has almost always chosen division. And we're seeing that now even with some of the response to some of his cabinet picks, where there's a real push on the right for folks like Kash Patel. And we have reporting that Trump was waffling about whether he wanted to put Patel up for an FBI job, this FBI director job, because they didn't think he'd be confirmed. There was some thought they'd give him maybe a lesser job that he could get through. But then Steve Bannon, others said, no, you need to put him at the top of the FBI. And that's what he's going with. So there have been moments where he's still, despite now never running for re-election, never running for election again, he still seems fearful of alienating the base too much.